Thank you very much, Dr. Porter. I just said to her and a fellow Michigander, since I've owned that Pepsi-Cola bottling plant 100% for 30 years, I like to tell people that I do things long term. I've been president of Hampton for 36 years, and I've owned that plant for 30 years, and I'm awfully proud to say that I've been married to the same woman for 47 years. So thank you, Dr. Porter. To Dr. Gardner, Dr. Lofton, to the members of the board, the officers, my fellow colleagues in higher education, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It really is a pleasure for me to stand before you to deliver today's keynote address for the opening of this year's annual conference of the American Association of Blacks in Higher Education, which is focusing on the theme, Pathways to Success in Higher Education, the new faces of race and gender. I have seen many people take varying pathways to success. However, the pathway that I know best is the one that I have traveled. Therefore, I will share with you today the pathway that I have taken for more than 45 years as an administrator in higher education. My pathway to success in higher education began a long time before I set foot on the campus of my alma mater, Talladega College. It began in Brewton, Alabama, the home of my parents, W.D.C. and Claudius P. Harvey. Although I have learned and experienced much in my lifetime, the leadership skills that have enabled me to serve 36 years as president of Hampton were first instilled in me by my parents, who were my first leadership role models. The lessons that I learned from them directly started me on the pathway toward my own leadership development. By his example, my daddy taught me, among other things, the leadership lessons of listening, asking questions, seeking input, and analyzing information received. By her example, among other things, my mother taught me fiscal responsibility and the understanding that in order for a leader to lead others, he or she must have the personal qualities about themselves which inspire others to want to follow them. During the 1940s and 50s and 60s, my father was a building contractor and civil rights leader in Alabama. At one time or another in his lifetime, Daddy was the president of the local chapter of the NAACP, SCLC, the Brewton Civic League, and other civil rights organizations. My speculation as to why my father played such a leadership role during those turbulent times was threefold. First, he was fearless and a natural-born leader. Secondly, he was a passionate person who cared deeply about freedom and equality and the struggle for racial justice. Thirdly, as a self-employed building contractor, he was not subjected to the pressures and intimidations of an employer threatening his job. The last point is the reason that I believe so many African American ministers, physicians, dentists, morticians, and other self-employed people assumed leadership in the South. They did not have to worry about being fired by their employer. During these dehumanizing, racist times in the South, African Americans and other minorities were not permitted to utilize public accommodations such as this wonderful hotel that we're eating in now or staying in, and restaurants. Therefore, civil rights leaders such as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Ralph David Abernathy, Mr. A. Philip Randolph, Mr. Roy Wilkins, and a host of other regional, state, and local activists knew of families and homes all over the South who would provide a respite for them when they were traveling. The Harvey household in Brewton, Alabama, was one of those homes that served as a meeting place for the local organizations and a rest stop for people who were out-of-town travelers. For the travelers, most of the visits occurred on the weekends and might include a meal, a glass of tea, a glass of lemonade, a nap on the living room couch, or an overnight stay. Their visits always included interesting conversation. I shall forever be indebted to my father for allowing me to sit in on some of those meetings. He gave me permission to sit in with the proviso that I could not ask a question, venture an opinion, or otherwise speak. And for those of you modern parents that tell your kids to go sit in the corner, if I had disobeyed my daddy, I probably would be up here today. As my daddy would say to me, you are to listen and to learn. The civil rights leaders that I have the clearest recall of was Dr. Martin Luther King's brother, Reverend A.D. King. He was a frequent visitor and at times would stay overnight. Reverend A.D. King's visits stand out because of his shaving powder. He used a shaving powder called Magic Shave. And it stunk to high heavens. On the mornings when Reverend King would shave, my sister Ann and I would hold our nose, run and get the other one, and point to the bathroom door and giggle because we knew what was going on. Now, I will say to you, and I told his daughter this about 2 years ago, Reverend King's daughter. Both of us spoke at a Chick-fil-A retreat down here in Georgia. And I told her this story I'm telling you. Her daddy, Reverend A.D. King, was a wonderful, charismatic leader. A lot of folk know about Dr. Martin Luther King. Reverend A.D. King was a wonderful, charismatic leader. But my sister and I remember him best for his stinking shaving powder. It was during those conversations with civil rights activists that my admiration, appreciation, and fascination with my father's leadership and leadership style grew. One of the first things that I noticed about those meetings was that Daddy was a good listener. He usually did not do a lot of talking, but genuinely seemed to appreciate the thoughts of others. Secondly, particularly at the local meetings, he asked great questions. He would call individuals by name and ask them, what do they think of a certain situation, issue, or strategy? Sometimes, when the response was not on the point, he would say, "That's not the question that I asked." I do that a lot today. Invariably, the clarity that he sought would come from the respondent. Third, Daddy was a good consensus builder. After receiving input, including disagreements and sometimes arguments, he would articulate a plan to include much of what the members had discussed. This consensus building clearly got the group to take ownership in the larger strategy, no matter how small their input had been. My father had a keen intellect and an analytical mind, although he had only an 8th grade education. Not at that time, but later in life. I attributed that analytical intellect to his mastery of numbers. The mental capacity would allow him to draw housing plans, operate a slide rule, and my daddy could do math, adding, subtraction, multiplication, and division as fast as a modern-day calculator. And I'm not kidding with you. Only had an 8th grade education. I have sat in meetings and watched him receive, distill, and analyze the information that had been presented and propose a plan of action. He had a superb gift, and his use of it made me appreciate him and his methodical examination even more. Now, what am I saying? His examples of listening, and too many of us don't listen, too many of us talk, but his examples of listening, consensus building, making sure that people can take ownership in your vision. You're not the king of the world. Get people to come along with you. And his analysis became a role model for me throughout my life as I have interacted with people and organizations. I realize now that not being allowed to speak was a small price for the lessons learned and for me to be an eyewitness to history. On some of those occasions, I heard about current civil rights events and strategies, future plans and strategies for the success of the movement. My daddy and I would always talk. Some of the things that Dr. King and others would talk about 3 or 4 weeks before would take fruition 3 or 4 weeks down the road. My father's insistence that I not speak actually honed a very significant skill that stood me in good stead all of my life. That skill is listening. Now, by her example and her teaching, my mother also provided some outstanding leadership lessons to my sister and me. One of the best lessons learned dealt with fiscal conservatism. Mother would often tell my sister and me that her concept of finances were really very simple. She said that one's expenses should never be more than their revenues. As an example, ladies and gentlemen, she would say to us, "William, Ann, if you take $1 and go to the grocery store, you can't buy $1.25 worth of groceries." That's simple. Simple but understandable. I wish that more people in our organizations, in our state, and on the national levels would adhere to this simple concept. If you only have $1, you can't go to the grocery store and spend $1.25. A second long-lasting lesson was the importance my mother would say, of character. She instilled in us the core values of honesty, integrity, respect for oneself, respect for others, and that we should always treat people like we wanted them to treat us. I've heard that saying many, many times since, but I heard it first from my mother. My mother would say to us, always do the right thing, even when no one is looking. I've heard that since, but I heard it first from my mother. While now, let me confess to you, I lay no claim to always having done the right thing. I learned early on that character is an integral component of leadership. Let's examine some of my mother's core values. It was always drilled into us that honesty was the best policy. This is one of the pillars of foundation of leadership. If one cannot be truthful in dealing with others, then success will be fleeting. I do not appreciate a blatantly untrue statement from anyone whom I'm associated with. Faculty, staff, administrators, and students at Hampton know that one of the worst things they can do is tell me a story. Don't tell me the truth. Now, let me say this. All of us make mistakes, and I will acknowledge that I probably make more than most. But what I tell my mentees and others is, if someone does something wrong or make a mistake, then that individual should admit it, endeavor not to do it again, and move forward. I respect, appreciate, and admire honesty. The truth can be easily forgiven and forgotten. And untruth can be forgiven, but difficult to forget. Integrity. Talking about my mother now. In the context of leadership and leadership development, integrity is the adherence to honor, trust, truthfulness, and an approved standard of personal and professional conduct. Standards are important in any discussion of integrity because adhering to a clearly defined and approved set of rules is completely necessary if one is to have an orderly, democratic, and thriving organization or society. Most profit, nonprofit, government, athletic, and other organizations are governed by a set of written and or understood standards of conduct. As an example, regional and national accrediting bodies promulgate rules to which every institution in the country must comply. In athletics, the NCAA has a set of rules and regulations which all of its members must adhere to in order to remain in good standings. If institutions or athletics programs do not remain in good standings, they are punished or even dropped from membership. Now, as these two examples illustrate, integrity forces institutions and individuals to conduct themselves in a manner that is consistent with rules, regulations, and accepted standards of behavior. Whether it's business, organizations such as this, government, higher education, or the like, one should play by the rules which govern that particular enterprise. Cutting corners, ladies and gentlemen, does not work. Shortchanging someone does not work. I say often that a deal or a contract which causes one party to win and the other party to lose is not a good deal. An agreement that allows both parties to win is not only a good deal, but can form the basis for future business and a solid relationship. Without a doubt, integrity should be incorporated into any leader's personal and professional persona and is a sine qua non for decency, good character, and virtue. Respect. I view respect as showing esteem and deference toward deserving individuals, ideas, organizations, appointed or elected positions, institutions, relationships, and the like. Respect means that a person has and shows a high positive regard for the worth of someone or something. Even if there are disagreements with someone or something, addressing the issues in a direct, straightforward, respectful manner is the appropriate way to handle a situation. People can disagree without being disagreeable. There can be debates without rancor. It is equally important to respect oneself. Learn to appreciate one's own ability, as every one of us has strengths and we have weaknesses. One should work toward accentuating those strengths and eliminating or ameliorating the weaknesses. Listen to this one good. Don't be jealous of another person's success. Don't be jealous of another institution's success. Rather, work to succeed by emphasizing the positives about yourself or your institution. This way, one's own self-esteem and self-respect are enhanced. A positive regard for oneself can become infectious to colleagues, to team members, and others with whom there is interaction. To anyone on the pathway to success in higher education, please understand how important high personal standards are to the success of any endeavor. I firmly believe it is difficult to lead others if you don't have the discipline and the character to lead yourself. A teacher must set the example for others. You know, I've heard some folks say that, do as I say, not as I do. Well, a leader will not be able to sustain himself or herself over time with this kind of philosophy. In 1669, in No Cross, No Crown, William Penn wrote, "No man," I'll juxtapose today, including a woman, but he said, "No man is fit to command another that cannot command himself." That's a powerful statement. That's a powerful statement, but it's just as true and appropriate today as it was in 1669. Other personal qualities that I have found to be important are taking responsibility for actions and mistakes, providing support for colleagues and subordinates. You know, sometimes those of us get in positions and we want subordinates to provide support to us. It is equally as important to provide support to them as well. Being direct or straightforward in a personal and professional relationship, and carrying oneself in a decent, dignified manner. Now, let me tell you, one ought not to try and fool anyone with rhetoric, and you see that. Remember I talked about those people that do all this talking, or an exaggerated work ethic. Many times you talk to people, "Oh, I'm just so tired, I've been working. or your false intellect or your experience. After a while, people will see through the phoniness. By the same token, genuine behavior can have a positive impact on cynics and critics. Again, character means different things to different people. To any leader or aspiring leader, I would recommend my mother's philosophy of honesty, integrity, respect for oneself, respect for others, and the building blocks of good character development. Although I have been blessed to serve and lead Hampton University as its president for 36 years, I recognize that being president of an institution is not the only position of leadership, nor is it the only sign of a successful career in higher education. I will say to you that I am a very strong manager, a very strong leader, but I could do nothing without my team. I am the team leader, but I could do nothing without the deans and the chairs and the faculty. You talked about a $92 million grant. Well, we got a $140 million grant to put another satellite up. I don't know anything about that. I couldn't do that without the faculty. And I mean that sincerely, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I get the credit for a whole lot of stuff that I don't do other than to promote innovation and promote input and let everybody know that they are worthy. And that's what I'm saying to you if you're truly interested in the pathway to success. You should know that at every level and in every position in higher education, you can be a success by leading yourself and leading others within your realm of influence, no matter how small or how large. You know, years ago when I first started out as a minor official at Harvard, then I went to Fisk, then I went to Tuskegee, and then to Hampton. I regularly attended conferences specifically designed to address issues of concern to African Americans and higher education. At that time, the majority of African American students enrolled in college were enrolled in the nation's HBCUs. Today, the majority of African American students are enrolled in other institutions, technical and community college. At that time, the majority of conferences were black males who were working at HBCUs. Today, the audience is mixed, and thank God for it, with males and females who not only serve as HBCUs, but in majority institutions, technical colleges, community colleges, and the like. And let me go back to my daddy and his search for equality and justice. And I want to tell you that right now, I have 7 vice presidents. 5 of them are women. I got 8 deans. 5 of them are women. I did not set out to have Hampton to be the year of the woman. What I set out to do was, whenever I had a vacancy, to get the very best person qualified. And whether or not that was a woman, or a man, or a black, or Hispanic, or a white, or a young, or an old, we have done that at Hampton. And I think that that's why Hampton continues to flourish. I wish more people would think about things like that. Getting the best person qualified. Women, don't just look to hire women. Men, don't just look to hire men. Hire the best person qualified. I think that has served me well. Now, even though by its very nature, this conference is designed for blacks in higher education, they are whites, Hispanics, and Asians, and other ethnic groups in attendance. While this signifies to all of us that the new faces of race and gender are a reality in the higher education community, yet I would dare to argue that no matter your race or gender, everyone can have access to the pathways of success in higher education. If you think about even just some of the things that I have talked about, that pathway is there. I have lived long enough to know that although many changes occur from generation to generation, the foundation of success has remained the same. Whether it is the success of an institution of higher education, a Fortune 500 company, a system of government, or a gang, success is determined by leadership. Therefore, I challenge each of you here today to become leaders. Leaders who listen. Leaders who possess character. Leaders who are honest. Leaders who demonstrate integrity. Leaders who have a terrific work ethic. Leaders who have respect for themselves. Leaders who have respect for others. I assure you that if you practice these values, you will have chosen the right pathway to success in higher education. Thank you very much.